Hello, I'm Heritage. Welcome to Halfway Case Central by Heritage. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Bye.
Rain didn't fall that night. It attacked. It came sideways, relentless, the way Seoul rain always came in October, without apology, without warning, like the city itself was ringing something out. The Han River swallowed the reflection of 1,000 lights below, and the Gangnam skyline shimmered through the wet glass like a painting someone had pressed their palm against before it dried. 43 floors above all of it, Nia stood on the balcony of a penthouse apartment in the most expensive building in Apgujeong. She was barefoot on cold marble, her silk robe pressed against her skin in the wind. Below her, Seoul moved neon signs in Hangul burning pink and gold and white, the night trains crossing the river like slow-moving light, taxi horns and street vendors and the particular music of a city that never truly sleeps, all of it beautiful, all of it unreachable. Behind her on the heated marble floor, her phone lay cracked and silent. She didn't turn back for it. She hadn't turned back for anything in a long time. Her voice came quiet, not performing grief, not narrating it. Just saying the truth into the rain the way you say things when there's no one left to say them to. She said they told me I was lucky. She said it to the Han River, to the Gangnam lights. To every version of herself still living somewhere below in a city that had never quite learned how to include her, a Nigerian woman in a Seoul that admired her at a distance and kept its doors slightly closed up close. She said nobody warned me what it feels like to be lucky inside a cage. Then she said nothing else, because that was the whole sentence. That was the entire summary of 3 years. It hadn't always been like this. There was a before. The before was Lagos. Loud, saturated, completely itself. A city that had no interest in being anything other than what it was: too much traffic, too much noise, too much life packed into every square meter, and Nia moving through all of it with the confidence of a woman who belonged somewhere and knew it. She was 25 in the before. Not the kind of beautiful that required explanation, just the kind that stopped conversations when she entered rooms. She laughed from her whole chest. She remembered everyone's name. She called her best friend Zurib 7 times in one afternoon about nothing important, and considered this a productive use of her time. She was building a fashion consultancy from a 2-room studio in Lekki, and it was growing, slowly, the way real things grow, with difficulty and joy in equal measure. She was, in every sense that mattered, entirely herself. She came to Seoul for a fashion industry summit. 5 days. A hotel in Mapo, a packed schedule, the vague electric feeling of being somewhere new and full of possibility. It was at a networking reception on the second evening, rooftop bar, city spread below, the kind of event where everyone is trying to look less interested than they are, that she felt someone watching her, not casual watching. Something deliberate, patient. She turned and there was Jay. Now, this matters. Because later, when the story has finished and people are dissecting it, looking for the moment she should have known, they will want a clear answer. They will want an obvious warning sign with a label on it, but the honest answer is this: Jae Kwon was extraordinary to look at, and he knew it the way people know things they've been told since birth. Tall, sharp-featured, the kind of Korean man who wore a plain dark suit and made it look like a decision. He had a stillness about him, not shyness, not uncertainty, the stillness of someone who had concluded some years ago that the world would come to him if he simply waited long enough. He was not smiling. He was watching her. Specifically her in a room full of people also worth watching. He said without preamble, without introduction, in English that was precise and accented and calm, "You're the only person in this room who actually looks comfortable." She looked around. He said, "That's because everyone else is performing." He said, "And you're not." She said, "I'm Nigerian. We invented confidence. This is just my resting state." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. An acknowledgement. He said, "Jae Kwon." She said, "Near Adami." He said, "I know." I looked at the attendee list. She raised an eyebrow. He said it with such complete absence of shame that she couldn't decide whether it was arrogant or simply honest. She decided that night it was honest. Later she would understand that it was both. That the absence of shame was the entire architecture of who he was. He was in fashion investment. Korean-born, educated between Seoul and London, running a fund that backed emerging designers across Asia. He had money the way some people have weather, constantly, as a backdrop without ever having to think about it. He extended her trip by 3 days. This was the first thing he arranged without being asked, simply sent a message to her hotel saying he had moved her checkout and hoped she didn't mind. She should have minded. She said, "You can't just," and he said, "I've arranged a driver and dinner Thursday. There are things in Seoul worth seeing properly," she told Zurib on the phone that night. Zurib said, "He moved your checkout." Without asking, Nia said, "It was efficient." Zurib said, "Nia, listen to what you just said. Efficiency is for spreadsheets, not for men moving women's hotel checkout dates without asking." Nia said, "You're being dramatic." Zurib said, "I am always dramatic, and I am always right. Write that down. Nia did not write it down. She had dinner with Jay on Thursday and Friday. And the Saturday she was supposed to fly home, she rescheduled her own flight this time, which felt to her like the difference. She was choosing, she was in control. She flew home to Lagos. He called the next day. He called every day after that. He flew to Lagos 3 weeks later without making a large deal of it, simply arriving and taking her to dinner at a place on the waterfront. She'd walked past 100 times but never entered because the prices weren't printed on the menu. She told herself this was romance. She was not entirely wrong. That was the cruelest part. Zurib met him once before the engagement. Once was enough for Zurib. She came to the waterfront restaurant, Jay's suggestion, which Nia thought was generous and Zurib thought was strategic. Because public settings with good lighting and good food make people harder to criticize and easier to impress. Zurib sat down, accepted the menu, ordered the most expensive thing on it without blinking, and spent 45 minutes watching Jay Kwon the way a customs officer watches a bag coming through the scanner. After in the bathroom she said, "He's impressive." Nia said, "I know." Zurib said, "I didn't say I liked him. I said he was impressive." "Do you know the difference?" Nia said. Zurib said, "The man pours your water before you reach for it." "That sounds lovely. But ask yourself, does he do it because he's attentive, or because he's decided what you need before you've had the chance to decide yourself?" Nia laughed. She said, "You're reading too much into water." Zurib said, "I am a woman who survived 38 years by reading everything into everything." "Keep my number saved, Nia." Nia went back to the table. Jay was checking something on his phone. He put it away the moment she sat down, gave her his full attention, and smiled with the precision of a man who understood the value of being fully present exactly when it counted. Zurib from across the table observed this and said nothing. She started keeping notes. The wedding happened in Seoul, not Lagos, and this was Jay's quiet preference, stated once logically and never revisited because his network was in Seoul, his family was in Seoul, it simply made sense. Nia's mother and aunties flew in from Lagos and filled the venue with a Seoul oak fabric and ululations that bounced off the venue's minimalist white walls and frankly improved them. There was a traditional Nigerian blessing and a Korean pibik ceremony, and a reception dinner that served both jollof rice and galbi, and somehow both ran out. Jay's family received Nia with the specific warmth of people who were trying very hard and aware of it. Polite. Careful. Looking at her sometimes with a curiosity they were too well-mannered to voice. Seoul, Nia would later understand, had a very particular way of receiving African women. It wrapped the reception in courtesy and left the exclusion entirely unspoken. She would spend 3 years in that gap between the courtesy and the exclusion, smiling into it, trying to fill it. But that was later. At the wedding, everything sparkled. Jay stood at the altar in a white hanbok with gold trim, looking like someone who had expected to arrive here all along. Nia came to him in yards of ivory Seoul oak with Korean silk panels, hand-stitched in Lagos by her mother's tailor who had cried the entire final fitting, and she was the most extraordinary thing in the room. The cameras understood this. The room understood this. Jay held her waist gently, leaned close, said it quietly, only for her, "You're mine now, I'll take care of everything." She heard love. Zurib in the third row adjusted her head wrap and noted the exact phrasing. Said nothing, smiled for the photos, danced at the reception, ate her food and the untouched food of the Korean relative beside her who had pushed everything around the plate without eating, and Zurib had quietly, efficiently, claimed it when no one was looking. Before she left that night, she found Nia for 30 seconds near the bridal table and took her hand and said, "I'm always here. Whatever happens." "You hear me?" Nia laughed, said she was being dramatic. Zurib said, "Yes, keep my number saved." The first months in Seoul were the kind that confuse memory later, because they were not entirely miserable. This is important. People who hear stories like this one want the monster fully formed from page 1. They want the darkness announced, but control does not announce itself. It arrives slowly, wearing the clothes of care. Jay was attentive. Jay knew Seoul, knew which restaurants had private rooms that suited his position, knew which neighborhoods were worth living in, knew the invisible architecture of status in a city where status was an exact science. He built their life with precision. A penthouse in Apgujeong, a personal assistant for Nia, a driver, a wardrobe consultation. Everything arranged before she could arrange it herself. She told herself, "He loves me efficiently." The problem with efficient love is that it leaves no room for your own. She noticed the first crack on a Tuesday morning. Jay at the kitchen counter reading something. He said without looking up conversationally, "Are you still messaging Zurib?" She looked up. She said, "Of course, she's my best friend." He put the tablet down. He looked at her with those dark, steady eyes and the expression of a man choosing patience deliberately. He said, "I just wonder sometimes if she's the right influence. She's very loud, Very Lagos, you're building a different kind of life here, Nia said. She's my person, Jay. He said, I'm your person now. He said it warmly. He picked up his tablet again. The conversation was over because he had ended it. She replied to Zurib 2 days later instead of immediately, then a week later. Then less, then barely. Until Zurib, who had the dignity of a woman who did not beg, sent a final message that said, I see you. I'll be here when you're ready. Message delivered, not read, and Nia in a penthouse in Apgujeong told herself she was simply adjusting. Growing, becoming, she was losing herself. But the penthouse had underfloor heating and the view of the Han was genuinely extraordinary, and some cages are very, very beautifully built. The bank account restructuring happened 3 months later. Jay presented it at breakfast with a document already prepared. He said, I've consolidated everything. It's tax efficient and it simplifies the accounting. You have a card with a monthly allowance, it's more than you'd ever spend. She looked at the document. She said, where's my account? He said, merged. It's all ours now. She said, Jay, I need my own. He said, Nia, just her name. Flat, patient the way that is not gentle. I have built a life that most men in Korea could not provide for their wives in 2 lifetimes. I am not the enemy. I am the person paying for all of this. He looked around at the penthouse, the art, the view. Is this not enough? She opened her mouth. He said, or is there a reason you need separate money I don't know about? She closed her mouth. That sentence, that precise surgical insinuation. It didn't accuse, it just planted. And she would spend weeks afterward examining her own behavior for evidence of whatever he had implied because that was how it worked. He didn't tell her she was guilty. He simply installed the question. She said no. You're right, sorry, that apology unnecessary. Catastrophic. The beginning of the end of herself. The phone checks began as jokes the way all erosions begin, gently. Jay picking it up and scrolling with theatrical suspicion and laughing and handing it back. She laughed too. It was funny, they were playful. This was just how they were, except it happened every day. Then it happened the moment she walked in the door. Then one afternoon she came back from a walk, 40 minutes, 3 streets, fresh air. She had bought barley tea from a convenience store, and Jay was in the living room and he said, not looking up, you were gone a while. 40 minutes, she felt guilty. She felt guilty for 40 minutes of walking in her own neighborhood, and she did not yet have the words for what this meant, only the sick, cold knowledge that something was wrong and she could not name it clearly enough to argue against it. One evening she said, Jay, this is too much. The checking, the monitoring, it's too much. He turned from the window. He looked at her with an expression of such genuine seeming hurt that her certainty wobbled immediately. He said, too much. Caring about my wife is too much. She said, that's not. He said, do you know what I gave up to build this life? Do you know what my colleagues said when I brought home a wife from Lagos? I defended you. Constantly. And you stand here telling me my concern is too much. That sentence, brought home a wife from Lagos, sat in the room like something dropped and not picked up. She should have named it. She didn't. He said, do you know how many women in this city would? She said, please don't finish that sentence. He finished it anyway. Would be grateful to stand where you're standing. She said nothing, because she was no longer certain. Because he had over months so consistently presented her own perceptions as overreactions that she had started running her feelings through his filter before trusting them. Checking herself against his version. Editing herself into something smaller. She said nothing. The penthouse felt colder, not the temperature, something else. She called her mother in Lagos on a Sunday evening, sitting in the bathroom with the tap running, and she noted the fact that she was running a tap in her own home to have a private phone call and chose not to examine it. She said, Mum, I'm not okay. Her mother said, what kind of not okay? She said, he controls everything, the money, who I speak to, where I go. I feel like I'm becoming invisible. Her mother was quiet. Then adjusted her wrapper, Nia could hear it, that specific sound, and said, marriage is not always sweet. You endure, we all endure. Nia said, Mum, this is more than. Her mother said, give him a child. A baby will settle him. Men like Jay need something to anchor them. Give him a child and watch everything change. That sentence. Delivered with the certainty of a prescription. As if a new life were a behavioral correction tool. As if a baby were something you deployed. Nia sat on the bathroom floor in Apgujeong penthouse with an expensive tap running to hide her phone call and thought, this is the advice. This is what I have, she decided to hope. Hope, she would later say, is the most expensive currency available to a woman in her situation. And she spent it freely. She was pregnant by the following spring. When she told Jay, something happened in his face that she had not seen in months, something unguarded. Raw, he held her. Not efficiently. Actually held her with the weight and warmth of a man who had felt something real reach him. He said her name. Just Nia, nothing else, and she exhaled. For 2 months the before returned. He came home early. He bought things for no reason, tiny socks, a book about Korean lullabies, a plant for the nursery. He began clearing himself on a Saturday morning without being asked. He was gentle with her body, present in her days. She called Zurib. No answer. She had called too infrequently, too late, and Zurib had stopped expecting to hear from her. She left a voicemail that said, "Things are better. I think things are getting better." Then she sat by the Han River window and let herself believe it. She was wrong. She knew it the morning he came to the bathroom door and said, "You're still in there," in the flat voice of impatience dressed as concern. She knew it the evening she fell asleep at 7 and he woke her to say, seriously, near dinner. She knew it the Sunday he said, casually over breakfast, "Korean women work through the full 9 months, you know." Said it the way you state a fact about weather. She tried. She managed. She read his moods the way people read skis, watching for pressure changes, adjusting behavior, staying ahead of what was coming. She was 7 months pregnant and surviving on 4 hours of sleep, and the specific exhaustion of a woman who has been performing gratitude so long, she has forgotten what she is actually grateful for. And then, on a night in November when Seoul rain was coming sideways and the Han was black and full, everything ended. The hospital in Sinchon was bright in the way of places that cannot afford ambiguity. White, absolute, every surface reflecting light that asked no questions and offered no comfort. Nia lay in a bed that was too stiff in a room that was too quiet. The silence of a hospital where the news has already been delivered and the room is simply waiting for the person to absorb it. No heartbeat. The grief arrived not dramatically but in a slow, rising flood, starting in her chest and expanding until she couldn't locate where she ended and the loss began. She lay still. The ceiling was white. The lights were white. Everything was white and her hands were empty, and she was empty in a way that words were simply not built for. Jay came. He stood at the foot of the bed. He was in his jacket, collar slightly open, the face of a man running a calculation she could not read. Not grief. Not the face of a man who had also lost something tonight. Something else. Something that looked from where she lay in that white light with her body emptied like disappointment. The silence lasted. Neither of them moved, then he said it, quietly. In Korean first, then in English, as if the repetition would make it more precise, he said, "Koi huttoin, ko chedetoin, ko mot, and ko henne." You couldn't even do this right. If you had been in that room, you would have heard nothing break. No gasp, no sound, no shattering, just a click. Somewhere inside near Adami. Quiet as a lock turned from the inside, a door closed permanently without ceremony. She did not look at him. She lay in the white light and she understood with the total clarity that only absolute devastation delivers exactly where she was. Exactly what this was. Exactly what it had always been, not a marriage, not a love story. Not even a difficult love story trying to find its way. A cage, gold-plated. Apgujeong addressed, climate-controlled. 43 floors above the most beautiful city in East Asia, a cage, and she was done. If this story is already speaking to you, share it. Right now, you don't know whose screen it needs to reach today. The weeks after were grey without being dramatic about it. Nia moved through the penthouse like a woman completing a sentence. She did what was required. She showed up where showing up was expected. She answered questions with the minimum number of words that registered as answers. Jay seemed to interpret this as peace, as the quiet compliance he had always been working toward. He returned to his routines, the monitoring, the accounting of her time, the careful maintenance of the public image of a man with a beautiful, devoted, properly managed wife. Nia watched him. For the first time since the networking reception in Marpo, she watched him without love in her eyes. And without love, she saw clearly. She saw the way he adjusted his posture before answering important calls. The way his voice changed when speaking to his sunbees, older colleagues he needed to impress, versus the way it fell flat when directed at her when no one was watching. She saw the way he moved through Seoul, certain that his version of reality was the only version that had legal standing. She watched him and she thought, I have spent 3 years believing his assessment of myself over my own. She thought, I want myself back. Not dramatically. The thought arrived like a decision already made. Small, certain, final. She wanted herself back, and she was going to go and find her. Hit the subscribe button right now so you won't miss any of my stories. Running into Zurib was not planned. This needs to be said clearly because later when the story is told and retold, and it will be told, in kitchens and offices and voice notes sent between women who recognize it, someone will suggest that the meeting was orchestrated. That Zurib engineered it. That she had been waiting strategically outside the Insadong market on that particular Saturday afternoon. For the record, Zurib had been in Seoul for a textile sourcing trip that had nothing to do with Nia and everything to do with the fact that Zurib's fashion business had expanded into Korean fabric imports, and she had flights booked 3 months earlier through entirely legitimate professional channels. She was haggling at a Pojangmacha stall over the price of some rammy cloth, in a combination of Yoruba, English, and the 6 Korean words she had learned specifically for markets when she looked up. And there was Nia, standing 15 feet away at a ceramics stall. Alone, Without the driver, without the assistant, without the managed, curated presence she had been performing for 3 years. Just Nia. In a coat that was beautiful but slightly too formal for a Saturday market because she had not, Zurib intuited immediately, worn her own clothes so long she had forgotten what casual felt like. Zurib looked at her. She looked at her the way she always looked at people, fully, without performance, like she was actually seeing the whole thing and not the version being presented. She saw the coat. She saw the careful posture. She saw that her friend, her person, the woman who had once sung off-key in a moving car with both windows down and zero apology, had become someone who stood in a Korean market looking like she was waiting for permission to be there. Zurib put down the rammy cloth. The vendor protested. She held up one finger at the vendor in the universal language of I am coming back, and walked directly toward Nia. She stood 2 feet away. She said, that pottery you're looking at is overpriced and the glaze will crack in 6 months. Nia turned, they looked at each other, no hug yet. No exclamation, just looking. The specific looking of 2 women who have known each other since 14 and can read the full document in a single glance. Zurib said, what happened to you, not as accusation, not as drama. Just the question, said with the gentleness of someone who already holds the answer and is asking only to unlock the room. Nia said, can we sit somewhere? Zurib said, I know a place. She collected her bag. She told the vendor she would be back. The vendor did not believe her. She was back 45 minutes later and bought everything she'd been looking at because Zurib always kept her word, even to strangers in markets, but that is a separate story. The place was a small Korean-Nigerian fusion cafe in a side street off, in Sadong that Zurib had found on her first day in Seoul with the instinct of a woman who can locate the one warm, slightly chaotic, completely honest room in any neighborhood. Wooden tables. Plants everywhere. A menu written in 3 languages. The television in the corner showing a Lagos drama that had apparently found its audience in the middle of Seoul, which delighted Zurib and which she pointed at immediately. She said, even here we cannot escape. Nia almost smiled. They sat, they ordered, the food came, and Nia talked, not in a straight line, not in order. Not with any of the composed presentation she had practiced for 3 years in a city where composure was a form of currency. She talked the way she used to talk to Zurib, without editing, without translation, without running herself through anyone else's filter first. She talked about the money first. Then Zurib's messages. Then the phone checks, the driver reports, the quiet, efficient removal of all her private spaces. Then the pregnancy. She stopped. She looked at the table. She told Zurib what Jay said in the hospital room. Zurib went still. Now you must understand what this means. Zurib was a woman of abundant, immediate, completely legible expression. Her face had never successfully hidden anything for more than 4 seconds in the 4 decades she had been alive. She was a live transmission. Always, but she went still, the stillness of someone doing very serious internal work. She said, he said that, in a hospital, while you were, Nia said, yes. Zurib said, say it again so I'm sure I have the correct information. Nia said it again. Zurib picked up her water glass, put it down, picked up her fork, put it down. Picked up the water glass again. Put it down with more precision this time, in the manner of a woman locating and then firmly closing a door inside herself that she needed to keep shut in order to remain in a public cafe. She said, I need you to know that I am currently performing a level of restraint that should qualify me for some kind of international recognition. Nia said, Zurib. Zurib said, I am being serious. I want it on record. I knew this man was dangerous from the moment he moved your hotel checkout without asking, but what you have just told me has significantly, expanded my understanding of the situation. Nia said, I know. Zurib said, he is not a difficult man, he is not a proud man or a complex man or any other polite word for what he is. He is. Nia said, I know. Zurib looked at her. Long. Then she put down every impulse she was carrying and she leaned across the table and she said quietly with absolute precision, you are not trapped. I need you to hear that first. You feel trapped because he has built walls and labelled them rules, but you are not trapped, Nia. You are scared to leave. And those are very different problems. Nia was quiet. Zurib said, the solution to the second problem is leaving. Just so we are clear on the destination, Nia said, he'll come after me. He has lawyers, he has reputation, he has this whole perfect image built in this city and nobody here. Zurib said, Nia. She stopped her. How much do you know inside yourself? What have you seen, heard, experienced? What do you have? Nia thought. She thought about the messages she had quietly, half instinctively saved. The photographs of certain documents in Jay's home office taken on evenings when he was on calls, and she had drifted through the apartment like she was invisible, which she was, which he had made her, which had accidentally given her access to everything. She thought about the timeline assembled in her own memory, the dates, the incidents, the receipts of a woman who had survived by watching. She said, more than he thinks. Zurib smiled slowly. The specific smile of a woman whose private assessment has just been confirmed. She reached into her bag, she placed her phone on the table. She navigated to a folder. She turned the screen toward Nia. She said, 3 years of your messages, every voice note, the text from before you started disappearing. I saved them all. Nia stared at the screen. Zurib said, I saved the one where you sang in the car. Terrible, off-key, not even the right words. Completely free. I saved it because I knew one day you were going to need to remember what free sounds like in your own voice. Nia looked up. Zurib said, I was building evidence, Nia, because I knew I always knew. And I needed you to know that somewhere someone was keeping the file on who you actually are. Nia's eyes filled. Zurib said, do not cry in this cafe. The owner is already looking at us because I told her the drama on that television is unrealistic and she disagreed and now we are in a small conflict. Nia laughed. It came out rusty and strange and slightly too loud and completely, entirely, unmistakably herself. Zurib pointed at her face. She said, there she is. Hello. Nia laughed again, this time easier. This time with less rust. Zurib said, now eat your food. We have a plan to build and I have a flight in 4 days, so we need to be efficient. The planning took 3 weeks and had the covert energy of a production Zurib had clearly been mentally rehearsing for some time. They communicated through a phone Zurib had left behind. A secondary device, registered to a name Jay had no connection to, kept in a location he had no knowledge of. They met in public because public was safer. A cafe in Hongdae, the Insadong market, a Jjimjilbang in Mapo where they sat in the women's section in matching robes eating sikhai and discussing escape logistics at a volume just beneath the ambient noise, which Zurib had scientifically determined was sufficient for privacy. Nia saved money the only way available, through the small cash from family occasions, through what Jay considered beneath tracking. She photographed documents during the narrow windows of his meetings. She sent files to the new email address. She catalogued the timeline she had been unconsciously assembling for 3 years, giving it now the shape and order it needed. One afternoon at the Jjimjilbang, Zurib produced an envelope and slid it across the wooden floor between them with the theatrical deliberateness of someone who had decided that if she was going to do something covert, she was going to do it properly. Nia looked at it. She said Zurib. Zurib said cash, a number to call in Lagos, the address of a Korean women's shelter lawyer I found who handles international domestic cases and is, I have verified, excellent. And a list. Nia said, you made a list. Zurib said, I am a list maker. It is a spiritual calling. Are you questioning my gifts? Nia picked up the envelope. Zurib said, also I need to say something, in this building, in these matching robes. I need you to know that I have been frightened for you for 3 years, not in a way I performed or complained about, just quietly frightened. And I need you to know that your leaving is not just for you. It is for the Nia I have been keeping evidence of since 2022. She deserves to exist again. Nia looked at her best friend. In the warm light of a Seoul Jjimjilbang on a Tuesday afternoon in matching robes with sikhai and paper cups, she looked at the woman who had simply, without being asked, without receiving thanks, without any guarantee of the outcome, kept the file on who she actually was. She said, thank you. Zurib said, too fast. I wanted a slower moment. Nia said, Zurib. Zurib said, okay, you are welcome. Now memorize the list. I would say eat it afterward, but Korean multigrain paper is probably not the same as Lagos bread, so use your judgment. The night she left, Jay was at a gallery opening in Cheongdam-dong. He had told her not to wait up. He had said it pleasantly. The pleasantness of a man who has not yet noticed anything has shifted, because the thing that shifted had been shifting quietly underground for 3 weeks and left no surface evidence. He left at 7 p.m. wearing a charcoal suit and the mild satisfaction of a man with somewhere important to be. By 8:30, Nia was standing in the center of the master bedroom with one suitcase open on the bed. She packed with intention. Her own clothes from before, the ones she had kept in the back of the closet because Jay found them too Lagos, too bright, too much. Her grandmother's earrings that she had hidden in a drawer for 2 years because Jay had said once casually that they were a bit much for Seoul. Her work portfolio, the documents she had copied, her passport, the phone, nothing that was a gift from Jay. Nothing he had selected or paid for or used to curate the version of her he preferred, just her things, the things that had been hers before him. She zipped the case, she stood in the living room and looked at the penthouse, the view of the Han River. The art Jay had installed without asking her opinion. The underfloor heating, she would admit, was genuinely excellent. The marble that reflected everything perfectly, like living inside an idea of a life rather than an actual one. She had been so afraid of losing this. She looked at it now and thought none of this was ever mine. It was a set. A beautifully constructed, professionally maintained set. And she had been the actress placed in it to complete the image. She picked up the suitcase. She walked to the door, she opened it, stepped through, pulled it closed gently without drama, without a performance of departure. Simply shut it. The elevator arrived immediately as if it had been waiting. She stepped in. Watched the floor numbers descend. 43, 40, 35. She breathed. 20, 15, 10. The unfamiliar feeling in her chest, light, strange, almost uncomfortable in its unfamiliarity, like a window opened in a sealed room. Lobby. She walked across the marble floor. Past the night concierge who nodded. Through the automatic glass doors into Seoul. The Seoul rain was doing what it had been doing the night this story opened, coming sideways, without permission, announcing nothing. She stood on the pavement outside the most expensive building in Apgujeong and let it fall on her face. She stood there for 5 full seconds, then she walked into the city, into the night, into whatever came next. Jay called 51 times. Zurib counted because Zurib was back in Lagos by then, tracking the phone remotely, providing real-time commentary to Nia via voice note with the energy of a woman who had waited 3 years for this particular situation and intended to be fully present for it. Voice note 1, 11 calls. He's trying the reasonable approach. Don't answer. Voice note 2, 23. He's moved to concerned husband. Still don't answer. Voice note 3, 37, and he just sent a message calling you. I won't repeat it, but I have screenshotted it and forwarded it to the lawyer. It is genuinely perfect evidence. Thank him for me. Voice note 4, 51 calls total, 4 messages. Nia, I need you to know the lawyer said these messages alone are significant. He has essentially documented himself. Men who are used to being unchallenged do not know how to behave when challenged. Keep not answering. Voice note 5, which arrived at 2 a.m. Lagos time, meaning Zurib had stayed up. Are you okay? Just reply with one word. Anything. Nia replied. Jollof. Zurib replied immediately. That's my girl. The messages from Jay came in stages that were almost educational in their predictability. First urgency. Where are you? Nia, call me immediately. Then the performance of hurt. I can't believe after everything I built for you. Then the threat in concerns clothing. You have no idea what you're starting. Then when all of this met absolute silence, the thing he had always believed and had finally stopped maintaining the effort to conceal. I made you. You came to Seoul with nothing. You are nothing without this, without me. Nia read it once. She put the phone face down. She was in a small apartment in Mapo, a friend of Zurib's friend, a Korean Ghanaian woman named Abina who had heard a partial version of the situation, needed no further information, and opened her door with a spare key and a pot of doenjang jjigae already on the stove. The apartment was small and warm, and had a cat named Sejong who had immediately stationed himself on Nia's feet with the complete authority of an animal that has assessed the situation and made a decision. Nia looked at the cat on her feet. She thought, I want to exist with this level of unbothered certainty. She kept the phone face down. She did not respond to Jay. Not that night, not the following morning, not when he arrived outside Abina's building and Abina calmly filmed him from the window for 3 minutes and then called her lawyer, and not when through his formal lawyers the communications became official. Let him come. She had 3 years of assembled truth. He had an image. And an image, when it meets testimony supported by documentation, is very fragile. The courtroom in central Seoul was a sober Tuesday. Jay arrived first, flanked by 2 attorneys whose suits communicated an hourly rate that would make most people nauseous. He was composed. He nodded at Nia when she entered with the brief nod of a man who had decided to be magnanimous in advance of his expected victory. She did not nod back. Zurib, who had flown from Lagos specifically for this day, and had dressed in deep burgundy with a head wrap that said, I am a serious person who takes this seriously, and an expression that said, and I have also been waiting 3 years for this morning, was seated in the gallery. She had agreed to composure. She was performing composure with visible effort. Jay's lawyers were expensive and polished. They presented a narrative devoted husband, volatile wife, abandonment without cause, emotional instability post-pregnancy, a woman who had been given everything and found a way to be ungrateful for it. They used words like unstable and unreasonable and culturally incompatible, that last phrase delivered so smoothly that several people in the room missed it. Nia heard it. She wrote nothing down, she simply heard it, filed it, continued. When it was her turn, she stood. She did not perform. She had spent 3 years being performed at. She understood now with complete clarity that truth is not theatrical. It does not require costume or volume or the particular cadence of someone convincing. It simply requires saying. She said, Jaekwon built a very beautiful image. I lived in the truth behind it. Then she laid it out. Not emotionally, factually. The financial control documented. The isolation, documented through message timestamps that showed the precise withdrawal of her communications with family and friends over an 18-month period. The hospital record. The messages sent the night she left, 51 calls and 4 messages that his own lawyers had not yet read in full, and which became very interesting to everyone in the room when Nia's lawyer read selections aloud. She watched Jay's composure, that magnificent, lifelong, meticulously maintained composure, develop its first visible fracture. Then its second. In the gallery, Zurib sat perfectly still, watching each fracture appear, performing non-reaction with the concentration of a woman who had made a specific promise, and intended to honor it even though it was possibly the most difficult thing she had ever done. She did not smile. She sat on her hands. She breathed through her nose. She would later report that it was the hardest 45 minutes of her life. Divorce granted. 2 words on a Tuesday afternoon that rearranged everything. No swell, no triumph, no slow-motion moment. Just the verdict, the gavel, the legal conclusion of a document that should never have been signed in the first place. Nia sat in the courtroom as people began to move around her, and she took a breath. The specific breath of a woman who has been underwater for a very long time and has just finally broken the surface. Not triumphant, not simple. Something more honest, grief and freedom arriving together as they always do, because you cannot give 3 years of yourself to something that was never real and walk away clean. You walk away carrying the grief and the freedom simultaneously, and you learn that both are true, and neither cancels the other. Zurib appeared at her shoulder. No words, just her hand on Nia's back, solid and warm and exactly what had always been there even when Nia had looked away. After a moment Nia said, "It's over." Zurib said, "It's over." Nia said, "I didn't know if I'd actually." Zurib said, "I knew." Nia said, "You always say that." Zurib said, "Because I am always right. This has been established. Are we going to sit here or are we going to leave this building?" Nia stood. She picked up her bag. She looked at the courtroom, this room that had been the final battlefield, the last place his power had an address, and she looked at it fully, completely, without flinching. Then she turned and walked out. Seoul the next morning was itself again. Which meant vast, alive, neon-lit even in daylight, entirely indifferent to the personal histories of the people moving through it, and beautiful because of it. The Han River was silver in the autumn morning. Ginkgo trees along the boulevards had turned gold almost overnight, the way they always did in October, sudden, complete, like the city had made a decision. Nia walked through in Sadong alone. No driver behind her, no assistant beside her, no schedule set by someone else, no quiet monitoring of her pace or her purchases or her route. Just walking, through a city that had been her cage and was now simply a city. She stopped at a ceramics stall, different vendor, different day, and picked up a bowl that was a deep terracotta colour that Jay had once said was too loud for the penthouse. She turned it over in her hands. She bought it. She bought it for no reason, with her own money for herself. It cost 12,000 won. She held it the whole walk back. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Jay. She stood on in Sadong pavement, surrounded by ginkgo leaves and market sounds, and the smell of hotteok from a stall on the corner, and she looked at his name on the screen. She thought about a hospital room, white lights, empty hands, and a sentence, "You couldn't even do that right," that she had carried for months before she understood it said nothing about her and everything about him. She thought about a cracked phone on a penthouse floor. She thought about 43 floors, and a cage made of marble and underfloor heating, and the most extraordinary view of the Han River she had ever seen. She thought about who she was before Seoul, before the networking reception, before the restructured bank account and the managed wardrobe and the slow, surgical removal of herself from herself. She locked the screen. She put the phone in her coat pocket. She kept walking. Freedom was not, she understood now, a single moment. It was not the verdict or the suitcase or the elevator descending to the lobby or even the rain on her face outside the Apgujeong building. Freedom was a practice. It arrived in installments. In the first morning she drank her coffee too sweet because she liked it that way and there was no one to comment on it. In the first evening she played Nigerian music loudly in a small apartment and danced without calculation. In the first time she laughed completely, from her whole chest, without editing, without monitoring the volume, and heard herself and recognized the sound. It arrived in the moment she stopped waiting for Jay to change, stopped running her perceptions through his filter, stopped editing herself into the shape of someone else's preference. The moment she understood that she had never been trapped by the penthouse or the city or the marriage. She had been trapped by the version of herself she had agreed to become. And she had stopped agreeing. Zurib found her that afternoon near the Chengyechen stream. This time it was genuinely planned. Zurib texted, "Where are you?" Nia replied with a pin. Zurib arrived 12 minutes later carrying 2 paper cups of sangwacha from a stall she had located with the precise instincts of a woman who always finds the right thing in unfamiliar cities. She handed Nia a cup. She fell into step beside her. The stream ran beside them, narrow, clear, the sound of it easy and unhurried. Office workers and tourists and children moved along both banks. The ginkgo trees continued being gold. Zurib said, "How are you?" Real answer. Nia considered. She said, "I'm in between. Like I finished something but haven't started the next thing yet, like the silence between 2 songs." Zurib said, "That is the most poetic thing you have said in years." The old Nia is back, and she came back with vocabulary. Nia said, "I bought a bowl today." Zurib said, "I'm okay." Nia said, "Terracotta. Jay always said that color was too loud." Zurib said, "Of course he did." Nia said, "I'm going to put it in the middle of wherever I live next and look at it every day." Zurib said, "As you should, that bowl is now a political statement and I fully support it." She sipped her sangwacha. "What do you want to do? Not today, in general, what do you want?" Nia walked. She let the question sit. She turned it over with the slow, unfamiliar pleasure of a woman rediscovering that she is allowed to have wants. She said, "I want to rebuild the consultancy. Properly, I had something going before Seoul, I want to come back to it." She paused. "I want to go to Lagos for a month and be loud and eat my mother's food and not explain myself to anyone." Another pause. "I want to find out what I actually like. Not what I was told I should like. What I actually..." She stopped. She laughed quietly. She said, "I don't even fully know what I like anymore. Isn't that something?" Zurib said, "That is actually something. It is also the beginning. Knowing that you don't know is the first honest thing." They walked alongside the stream. The city moved around them, unhurried, enormous entirely itself. Street vendors calling. A busker somewhere playing something melancholy and beautiful on a gay Aegeum. The particular quality of Seoul autumn air, which was cold and clean and tasted faintly of chrysanthemum tea, and the particular alertness that comes with changing seasons. Nia breathed it in. She said, "Thank you, Zurib." Zurib said, "You already said thank you." Nia said, "I'm saying it again. For keeping the file. For the J. Jimjilbang planning sessions. For flying to Seoul for a courtroom. For the voice notes counting his calls at 2 in the morning Lagos time." Zurib said it was 51 calls. Nia said, "I know." Zurib said, "You are welcome, all of it, every part." She paused. "Also the sangwacha is medicinal and I think we should have another one." Nia said, "Zurib." Zurib said, "Healing requires herbal beverages. This is established science." She did not go back to the penthouse. She did not go back to Apgujeong. She did not walk past the building. She did not look at it from the river. She let it exist in the part of the city she did not need to visit, and she found that Seoul without that building in her daily orbit was a completely different city. Warmer, more navigable, more willing somehow to include her, or perhaps she was simply willing now to include herself. She found a small apartment in Yeonam-dong. 2 rooms, plants on the windowsill left by the previous tenant, which she watered because they were alive and deserved continuity. An upstairs neighbor who played drums badly every Saturday morning and with whom she eventually made peace by bringing up a container of jollof rice, which the neighbor, a retired professor of something, received with the expression of a man receiving a religious experience. She put the terracotta bowl in the center of the kitchen table. She looked at it every day. It was, she decided, the right color. It was exactly as loud as it needed to be. She called her mother in Lagos. Her mother cried, then said she was proud, then asked when she was coming home, then asked if she wanted to be set up with the son of a woman from church, and Nia said, "Mum, with the specific patience of a woman who has survived a great deal and can now absorb small ones, give me a year." She called Zurib every day for 2 weeks, then every few days, then on the schedule of people who are no longer afraid of losing each other. She rebuilt her consultancy, slowly, properly, the way real things are rebuilt, with difficulty and clarity and the specific advantage of knowing now, with complete precision, exactly what she would and would not accept. She walked along the Han River on Sunday mornings. She ate at Pojangmacha stalls without worrying about who might see her. She learned the names of the vendors in Yeonnam Market, and they learned her name and her order, and that she liked her tteokbokki with extra gochujang and didn't want to hear any opinions about it. She took up space in Seoul. Not the curated, managed, J-approved space of Apgujeong, her own. Chosen, imperfect. Real freedom doesn't come when they change, it comes when you do. She was walking home from the market one evening, the terracotta bowl wrapped under her arm because she had taken it to show a ceramics vendor who had agreed enthusiastically that it was excellent work and possibly vintage, when her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. She looked at his name. She thought about everything she had thought before and some new things too, about how a person could spend years being afraid of a name on a screen, and then one day look at it and feel simply nothing. Not anger, not grief, not the complicated pull of a love that had been so convincing for so long. Just nothing, like looking at weather. Like observing that it was raining and knowing you had an umbrella and continuing with your day. She locked the screen. She tucked the bowl back under her arm. She walked home through Yeonnam-dong in the Seoul evening, past the restaurant with the good sundabu jjigae, past the bookshop that stayed open too late, past the flower stall where the ajumma always insisted on giving her one extra stem because, she said, tall women deserved tall flowers. She received the extra stem. She walked home. She put the terracotta bowl back in the center of the kitchen table. She made tea. She sat in her own apartment, in her own chair, in her own life, and she was so completely, quietly, enormously herself that it almost felt new. It wasn't new. It was just hers, returned, reclaimed, held now with both hands. If this story found you, if it said something you needed to hear or reminded you of someone, please like this video and share it right now. Not tomorrow. Now. You genuinely do not know whose screen it needs to reach today. Subscribe to this channel for great stories, and in the comments below, tell me the moment that hit you hardest. I read every single one. Every single one. See you in the next story.